So do you have a pet name for your dog? Random question.
Wow. Post that one in the VIP lounge for a conversation starter.
Oh.
Welcome to the Greatest Lists podcast, a show about music and lists. This season, your hosts Jason and Eric are counting down the top 25 guitar solos of the 80s and the top 25 guitar solos of the 90s. Think your favorite made the list? Tune in and find out. Take it away, boys.
Welcome to Greatest Lists, a music and talk podcast featuring lists of the greatest songs of all time. I am Eric, your host for this episode, and joining me, as always, is my co-host Jason. What's going on, Jason?
Hey, Eric. Hope you're doing well. Just ignore the dolphin sounds in the background.
Oh, yes. We are continuing our Season 2 list of our favorite guitar solos of all time. We're currently, we are now in the top 10 of
top 10 of the
90s. That's amazing. In this episode, we're talking about Alice Cooper and a two-man guitar tandem of Joe Satriani and Steve Vai on the song Feed My Frankenstein.
Behind the music.
Feed My Frankenstein is a song originally written and recorded by British hard rock band Zodiac Mind Warp and the Love Reaction for their album Hoodlum Thunder.
Wow.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Came out in 91. Alice Cooper covered it for his 19th solo album, Hey Stupid, and released it as a single in 1992.
19th. Wow.
Yeah. It's a star-studded album, let me tell you. Not only are Joe Satriani and Steve Vai on the album, but Slash appears, Ozzy Osbourne, Mick Mars, Vinnie Moore.
Wow.
In fact, Joe Satriani plays on 5 of the tracks. Okay, so that original version by Zodiac Mind Warp and the Love Reaction is not available on Spotify, but you can find it on YouTube.
Okay.
And it's okay. It's not a bad. It's not a whole lot different than what Cooper did with his version. He stays pretty true to the original version. Obviously, Alice Cooper's production and the guitar solo are a level above. But it's not a. If I had heard that song and Alice Cooper had never recorded his version, I probably would have liked it still. So even though it's a cover, Cooper gained a co-writing credit for his version due to different lyrics from the original. It's technically a cover, but he has a co-writing credit for it because he changed some of the lyrics. The highest chart position that the single achieved was number 27 in the UK. It didn't even chart in the US. The song was featured in the 1992 film Wayne's World, in which
That's surprising.
in which Cooper performs the song at a concert, and it was also featured on the film's soundtrack.
Yeah, being on that soundtrack, I don't know how that didn't chart.
Yeah, I don't either.
That movie was huge.
When I read that, I was for as much play as it got on MTV and on the radio, I'm kind of amazed it didn't chart at all in the U.S. So when they were putting together the personnel for the album, they were trying to figure out who they wanted to tab for the guitar solo in this song. The producers wanted Steve Vai, but Alice Cooper wanted Joe Satriani, and the producers and his people, his agent or whatever, didn't think Joe Satriani would play because. And this is, I don't know how widely known this is, but Steve Vai is a guitar student of Joe Satriani. Joe Satriani was actually Steve Vai's original guitar teacher. And so people were saying that he didn't think that Joe Satriani would play. Some people were saying Steve Vai would play. So Alice Cooper just made a phone call to both of them and asked them to come play. And both of them said yes without any hesitation. In fact, I found an interview with Joe Satriani when they asked him about it. And he was like, well, what do you say when Alice Cooper asks you to come play? I mean, you have to say yes, right? So they got
You're not
both...
worthy.
Exactly.
Not worthy.
I mean, who would say no to
We
Alice
suck.
Cooper?
Yeah.
So both Joe Satriani and Steve Vai are actually on our list coming up in the coming weeks. So we're going to save their background for their individual shows and talk about them then. But this track also features Nikki Sixx on bass guitar. And it also features Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, with a speaking part towards the end of the song.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's get personal.
So my actual history with this song is more from the movie Wayne's World than it is anything.
Mine too.
Yeah. I've always liked the song, and basically because I knew that it was Joe Satriani and Steve Vai playing in the solo. Other than that, I've never really been a huge Alice Cooper fan. I've always liked, like the album before this one was called Trash, and he had, a couple of hits off of that. I've always liked what I've heard on the radio and MTV, but I was never really familiar with his older stuff as a shock performer.
Mm-hmm.
However, 6 or 7 years ago, when Motley Crue went on their first retirement tour, he was their quote unquote opening act, and he did his full show that night that I saw Motley Crue, and it was actually a really good show. When he did this song, they had, like, if you've seen the video, you see the big Frankenstein come off the stage. He had that in concert, and he had all of his older stage props. It was a really good show. But that's really the only history I have with Alice Cooper is his appearance in Wayne's World and this song.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, you just pretty much read my notes, because my only reference to this song and him in general really is Wayne's World. I've heard his music on classic rock stations over the years. No More Mr. Nice Guy, of course, School's Out.
Yeah.
But I've just never been interested to dig into his albums.
Yeah.
The song is pretty memorable from Wayne's World. There's that short glimpse of the concert they're at in the movie. He bursts through the chest of that huge skeleton. I mean, that's pretty memorable.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I was pretty quick to realize that Frankenstein is more of a pet name than a monster when you're listening to the song. Doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. And we'll leave it at that. Yes. But yeah, I've never really, 19 albums, that surprised me. Yeah. And to hear all the people that were on the album surprised me as well.
Yeah. So, I read that I think they were trying to build on the success of his previous album. And so they were just, trying to stack it full of high profile.
Yeah. And I tried not to dig into the history, knowing that you'd bring it. So I assumed there was 2 different guitarists on this track without even looking.
Yeah.
So I just didn't know who they were. So that was even a surprise to me.
Yeah. The
breakdown.
So it's a very short solo. The first half of the solo is Joe Satriani. The second half is Steve Vai. They also trade off licks on the outro of the song. You first hear Joe Satriani play, then you hear Steve, and then Joe, then Steve. And then they even trade off with the weird noises that serve as the intro to the solo. When you hear the drums and the bass kind of droning and they're making weird sounds. For those weird sounds, Joe Satriani said he pulled his whammy bar off of his guitar and began dragging it all over the strings while he was listening to the track. And then Steve Vai just started tapping and dragging his pick all over the strings as well to make that intro before they launch into their solos. Even back then, before I knew that Joe Satriani and Steve Vai were on there, you could tell it's them. If you're a guitar player and you're a fan of those two like I am, it's undeniable. And like I said, Joe's on 5 songs on the album, and it's all of them are very Joe Satriani like. So, it's a very short solo, but they cram themselves into those short pieces that they play. They don't. There's not a wasted note in those solos.
It's very much so. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fun. If you listen to it in your headphones like I did, it goes back and forth between speakers too, left and right channel.
Yep.
So they're almost answering each other with those weird effects there at the beginning.
Yes.
And then it just cuts loose, and there are 2 tracks, one in each ear towards the end too, that are kind of playing the same thing but not. and you can hear the different tones in the guitars too. So that's what immediately I was like, this has got to be two different people here, you know, playing.
Yeah.
So very cool. Very cool.
And like we talked about a couple episodes ago with the Smashing Pumpkins on how they, just figured out how to play two tracks and slow one of them down and make that weird, that weird effect. I was watching that interview with Joe Satriani, and he said Steve and I were looking at each other like, what are we going to do during this part of the song? And Joe Satriani said, I just pulled off my whammy bar and just started dragging it all over my strings. I mean, who does that? Who
comes up with that?
Yeah. And he said, as I was doing that, Steve was like, just started tapping his pick on the strings and dragging it up and down. And he said, we didn't really mean to use that, but we got done recording that part and we turned to look at Alice Cooper, and Alice was like, okay, what's next? He just like,
that's cool.
Yeah. So
that's cool.
So the combo of Joe Satriani and Steve Vai come in at number 10 on our list of top 25 guitar solos of the 90s. And this week's bonus song is another song from this album that features Joe Satriani. It's called Little by Little. And it's got a smoking hot solo in the middle of it too. If you have Spotify Premium, which is what we recommend, stay tuned. You'll hear that bonus song in its entirety, and you already heard the featured song in its entirety. Free Spotify users get just a glimpse of all the songs, and if you're outside Spotify, you're going to have to rely on the Song Whip links in the show notes to get your songs out of your favorite music app. Give us your thoughts on today's episode via social media. You can find us on Twitter at Greatest Lists, or you can head over to our website and stream all of our episodes in their entirety. GreatestListPodcast.com. Or, of course, we're available in your favorite podcast listening app. Jason, we're back in charge next episode with our number 9 song.
Number 9.
Thanks for listening to The Greatest Lists. We look forward to continuing our countdown next time.
You've been listening to The Greatest Lists.